Hey good people, Batavia here. Welcome back to my Chicago garden. And I'm going to share a truth moment. When I first started gardening, and for years when I was growing during mostly the summer, I had no idea that I could have this much food still growing in my garden this late into the year. And truthfully, I didn't realize I could grow so much early in the spring too, but that's another video. All right, so we've had our first hard freeze here in Chicago. It's hit my garden a couple of nights in a row, and we even had snow. But as we talked about in the last video, we were prepared for it. The plants that I still have, that I still want to be available, really are designed for the weather that we got. Even that category 2, that was kind of that borderline category, depending on how cold would be the tale of tales as to whether or not those plants survived, even they came through with just very minimal damage. But I do want to share with you what things look like when the snow and the cold really hit. So backyard, this is Monday morning after the first hard freeze. We had about 3 inches of snow. So that's lettuce and parsley and chard that's covered. I left the tarp on the carrots. I really just want to try to keep those dry so it's easy for me to get in and harvest when I want. So those did just fine. I do have some green stalks that had things like chard, some other things like turnips and beets. No, actually I think it's radishes, and then some parsley from way back in the season. A few lettuce plants as well. Cabbage, the one cabbage plant I have in the garden, and so it's in a container. It's been snowed on, so we'll see again if it just has enough time to actually put on a true head. Not so much worried about the weather. Our kale and collards, they look exactly like I would expect with the mid 20-degree temps, and that's not even really counting the real feel. Most of the plants look a little bit limp, but that's okay. Our mustard bed, we took a little bit of extra precaution and just using what I had as far as covering that. Those leaves are a little bit more tender. And then this space I covered with, this is like 6mm plastic, not greenhouse plastic, but just regular plastic that I bought years ago that I still will pull out and use occasionally. And so in here, the parsley, chard, like this seems unfazed, and you'll see it in the current day where we again had another night of basically 25, 26 degrees Fahrenheit temp. We're in current day, so we had the freezing temps, and we now have had what's even unseasonably warm weather. We got up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit yesterday. Actually, it was like 69 as a high. Sunny, the whole works. Today it's a little bit cooler, but our lettuce that's bolted, I'm still harvesting from the bottom. Those leaves aren't quite bitter. I had a great surprise. I mentioned to my neighbor that I was in the leaf collecting business. So I have some lovely leaves that I'll be using as a mulch when I start to put the garden to bed. So I have a few bags. I'll probably need a few more. But these are the carrots that are just basically a bit damp because this space was covered with snow. These aren't our main carrots, but we do have some smaller carrot bottoms down here. Good example of a tomato plant, and you can see the damage. And so we didn't expect for any of these kind of plants to survive. Remember, that's our category 1, where ultimately cold weather like we had would kill those plants. Same thing for the eggplant, some peppers. Here's the plastic. Again, not very thick necessarily, but this bed looks wonderful. Like really never had any tough weather. Parsley is pretty hardy, so I'm not surprised there. I did harvest some of the outer leaves of the chard and even the larger leaves, and I left that as a test to see how they would do. Sometimes I have great success with this weather for chard, sometimes not so much. But this year, everything looks really good. Mustard still look wonderful. I do have a couple of kale plants in here. This is a good example of what happens with some plants when they came in pretty small and then the mustards have basically shaded out the plants, which again is fine. I am going to cut these leaves this week because I'm going to make up a small pot of turnips and mustards. I picked up some turnips from the farmer's market. Here's an example of one of the things I use. Spring clamps, different sizes. hardware stores, your big box stores sell them. And I'm just clipping the fabric here. I definitely still see the cabbage worm. And while I haven't seen the cabbage butterfly since we had the cold snap, I'm not convinced that she's gone. So we wanted this bed to be full of spinach, but I tried a couple of times and it just didn't take as far as the direct sowing, but for a few plants, which spinach is super hardy, so not concerned about that with this weather. I just left it open. Some cilantro. This is the mach that was originally eaten up. I transplanted it. That looks like cilantro as well. Then I had a couple of spinach plants. I basically direct sowed like a third time to try to get it to take before the weather really set in. So I want to show this in comparison to what we'll see in the backyard. I let this basil go to seed many moons ago, and so these will be viable seeds. However, when we get to the backyard, we'll see a basil plant that had not truly developed seeds yet, so I'm not going to look to save those. Okay, doke. So front yard, plenty of sun. It's mid-morning. The backyard, though, sun is lower in the sky this time of year, and so it struggles when it comes to really getting sun exposure, and that's important when it comes to what we still have in the garden. That's really why this growth is slowing down at this point. It's not getting as much sun. Remember, this was the space that was covered in snow, and we have lettuce, parsley, and then the chard is the only thing in that space that looks a little limp. Those outer leaves are still edible. The center, which is most important, is still spry, so we're happy with that. The carrots look really good still, and let's come in. I've already harvested a couple of carrots this week. That was the purpose of the tarp. I wanted to be able to get in here and harvest when I wanted. Nice carrots. These are, yeah, there we had it. One more time these are growing on top of concrete. So I'm pleased with actually leaving the carrots. Remember, these were all clustered together, and that's why you're going to have varying sizes. They didn't get the best chance. But I'm pleased with still having these carrots, which are not woody yet, growing, or I should say, being stored in the garden. Because that's really what's happening with most of these things, especially with less sun exposure. So here's our cabbage. I did check to see what things look like, to see how firm this was. So it's still, it's so far away from actually firming up. Probably won't make it. All of those leaves are edible though. And I should give this a good watering. So arugula and kale from spring that we transplanted. So this was a space that I had on that category 2 list. Wasn't sure how it was going to do. These are beets and celery, and I did have it covered with that same type of plastic. So it wasn't completely covered. I just had where snow really didn't get on top of it, but the cold temps, were able to get in from basically this side. And I'm really pleased with the way things look. The cage baby, most things look like what you would expect, right? These are all tomatoes and peppers. And so the cold did them in. This is where I basically am going to be cleaning up over the next several weeks. And I also need to decide where I'm going to put my garlic. I'm doing long day garlic here in the north. We'll plant something like garlic in the fall. It'll be in my garden until like July. So I need to make sure I'm planting in a space that will not be needed for some other plants. So these things have bounced back. These leaves you can feel aren't as strong as, let's say, this center. Right, so I can still use them. Nice for basically any kind of use. Raw salads, if I want to saute them, if I want to juice them. But generally what I find is the outer leaves, if there's going to be damage, that's where it's going to start. But the center is still really viable. And again, if you get enough time, sun, the right temps, they'll put on a few new leaves, not much though. Couple of surprises. I left this mint and it still looks really good. And I've had mint over winter, like in raised beds, but I no longer leave them or plant them in raised beds because it's just so aggressive when it comes to spreading. Celery, this was not covered. So, collard greens and kale. Trying to get out of the one little bit of the glare. We'll open it up. So every plant has bounced back. And really the curly kale, I didn't really see much limpness when we had the cold temps with those plants. These are top bunch collards. Yeah, I think with the exception of the mint surviving for the most part, everything else worked as I expected it to. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below. A big thank you to those who continue to watch, who like, who share, who comment. I appreciate y'all. If you haven't subscribed already, think about it. It's a button below. And to those that have subscribed, thank you. All right, I'll see y'all in the next one.